online, and thank you for joining us for our lecture series. I'm Lindy Crew, CAARI's director, and it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Professor Bernard Knapp, who really needs no introduction to this audience. But that being said, I will of course say a few words to welcome and introduce Bernard. He's Professor Emeritus in Archaeology at the University of Glasgow and Honorary Research Fellow at CAARI. For almost 50 years, Bernard has been a leading researcher in Cypriot and wider Mediterranean prehistoric and protohistoric archaeology, beginning with his PhD dissertation from the University of California at Berkeley, entitled A Re-Examination of the Interpretation of Cypriot Material Culture in the MC2 to LC1 Period in the Light of Textual Data. The volume we will hear about this evening is the latest of many works dealing with themes of social transformations and integrating the textual and material evidence from the archaeology of both land and sea. He has over 100 publications, including more than 25 authored or co-edited books, which include synthetic studies of Cypriot prehistory, as well as reports on fieldwork, theoretical papers, and textual and material studies. Indeed, Bernard is to be thanked as one of the leading scholars who have brought the archaeology of Cyprus to a wide international audience. He also served as long-term editor of the Journal of Mediterranean Archaeology, which he co-founded, as well as for the series of monographs in Mediterranean archaeology. Bernard is a CAARI stalwart, and we are extremely grateful for his ongoing support of both our institution and the generations of student researchers who come through our doors. For tonight's book launch, the publishers, Sidestone Press, have kindly offered us a discount code to purchase online, not only Cyprus and Ugarit, but they're also offering a 25% discount on any Sidestone volumes. The code is Cyprus25, and we have printed vouchers here for our live audience to take away, and you will find the details in the online chat on the Zoom for our online audience. So I would now like to invite Professor Knapp to present his lecture entitled Cyprus and Ugarit, A Tale of Two Polities. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. And thanks for all of you who turned out here on what must be the coldest night in Cyprus in the 21st century. Those of you who aren't here, it's only about 9 or 8, but it's going down to 5 degrees tonight, and it feels cold. Anyway, on with the thought. So can everybody hear me? Good. As mentioned in the preface to Cyprus and Ugarit, I have been interested in the long-term relation between these two polities for a good half-century. First, when I presented my MA thesis in 1973 to the Department of Near Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley. That thesis had an ambitious title, Mycenaean Pottery at Ugarit, Some Historical and Chronological Reflections. I say ambitious, given that I was no expert in Mycenaean pottery, then or now, and hardly at a stage to be writing historical or chronological reflections. The second venture came a decade later, 1983, when I published a paper in the journal Tel Aviv entitled An Elashian Merchant at Ugarit. That paper, at least, has better stood the test of time. Although I touched upon the topic of relations between Cyprus and Ugarit in several other papers, the daunting amount of material published or not published in the case of Ugarit, always gave me pause in confronting it directly. Last year, however, following nearly 2 years of on-again, off-again research and writing, I decided that enough was enough, and so submitted the final work for publication. Thus, although it's now completed, at best the topic itself remains incomplete, but the study at least offers a starting point for others to conduct further research, or to complain in reviews or emails about what I omitted or overlooked. However critical the reviews may be, I trust, or rather hope, that students and scholars alike will find useful the effort that went into producing 4 tables of data presented in this study. Now, I know these tables are not going to turn out very clearly on the screen. Well, they may not even appear on the screen. Cypriot pottery in Ugarit, Canaanite jars on Cyprus, Ugaritic cuneiform documents mentioning or related to Alatia, and Akkadian cuneiform documents mentioning or related to Alatia. I'll go back if I can. Anyway, hold for that. These 4 tables represent much of the material and almost all the documentary evidence upon which the study is based. They can, and in time, surely will be expanded, but as of 2024, they are as complete as the published record allows. The table on Cypriot pottery and Ugarit especially stands alone. It took nearly 2 months of focused research time to produce and then discuss in the study itself. So, what does all this material mean, and how might it be understood? In this volume, I sought to present not only the story of Cyprus and Ugarit, but also the story of Cyprus versus Ugarit. To summarize what I mean briefly, beyond the cultural homogeneity that seems evident between late Bronze Age Cyprus and Ugarit, economically the 2 polities were quite distinct. Ugarit was a long-established commercial hub with at least 2 major ports where all kinds of goods, including raw materials, were available. By contrast, Cyprus was a newcomer to the Eastern Mediterranean commercial sphere, its main resource being copper, an essential material component of the Bronze Age. Over the course of the late Bronze Age, the power dynamic between these 2 polities changed dramatically. Cyprus and Ugarit are 2 of the best known, well-connected polities in the late Bronze Eastern Mediterranean. Over nearly half a millennium, between about 1650 and 1200 BC, close, long-term mercantile relations existed between Ugarit and its ports, Minet el-Beda, seen here, and Ras ibn Hani, and the harbor towns of Cyprus, for example, Enkami, Hala Sultan Teki, Kition, Moroni, and others. For various reasons, not least the abundant material and documentary evidence that has accumulated over nearly 100 years, there have been few attempts to quantify and evaluate the nature of those relations, especially from a theoretical perspective. In Cyprus and Ugarit, I engaged interpretative concepts such as merchants and mercantilism, actors and agents, and maritime spheres of interaction in the attempt to gain new insights into Cypro-Ugaritic relations during the late Bronze Age. In material terms, I sought to quantify and consider some features common to both polities. For example, ashlar masonry, urban mortuary practices, the Cypro-Minoan script, composite anchors. I then examined more specifically the amount and types of Cypriot material uncovered in Ugarit, notably pottery, metals, and seals. Because it's more difficult to assess materials found on Cyprus that derive specifically from Ugarit, it was necessary to engage as proxies Levantine goods and products more generally, like, for example, Canaanite jars. In one chapter, in sections devoted to people, politics, and professions, I presented and discussed the known documentary evidence from Ugarit related to these two polities. 23 texts written in Akkadian cuneiform, 23 in the local Ugaritic cuneiform. Although there are several instances of texts and other materials like clay balls, pot marks, and so on, written in the Cypro-Minoan script in both Ugarit and on Cyprus, that script remains undeciphered and renders an unknown language. All these streams of complementary evidence enable us to form a broad impression of material and mercantile connectivity in the late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. In turn, such evidence allows us to reflect upon the merchants of Ugarit and Cyprus, maritime spheres of interaction, and the people involved in these transactional worlds. Amongst the more prominent and key components of materials exchanged between Cyprus and Ugarit are the pottery, metal items, and seal or seal impressions. For example, the most prevalent types of Cypriot pottery wares found at Ugarit are base ring, 226 examples, white slip, 216 examples, and white shave, 54 examples. In turn, an estimated 350 Canaanite jars have been recovered from 21 different late Middle and late Bronze Age sites on Cyprus. Although I have to report that in a very recent issue of Internet Archaeology 2024, Resch and all have reported on their work at Irimi Pitharka, where one more nearly complete Canaanite jar was found, along with 2 sherds. So now there's at least 352 Canaanite jars from 22 different late Middle and late Bronze Age sites on Cyprus. Documentary and material evidence and science-based analyses indicate that Cyprus was the main source of copper used in Ugarit's bronze industry, or else distributed further afield through Ugarit's ports. Excavations at the port of Ras Ibn Hani, for example, not only uncovered various metallurgical installations, pot bellows, crucibles, and tuyères, but also the only known oxide ingot mold. Oxide ingots, of course, are widely regarded as one of the signature material features of late Bronze Age Cyprus. From metal workshops at Ugarit come several tools, shovels, tongs, spatulae, and a hammer that find nearly identical counterparts in various Cypriot hoards. Likewise, a cache of metallurgical tools from Minet El Beda includes some axes, sickles, tongs, and a large spiral-handled shovel, remarkably like tools from a metal foundry at Enkumi. Turning to seals, excavations at Ugarit and Minet El Beda have produced more examples of seals regarded as Cypriot in style than all other Levantine sites combined. Several seals show different carving styles, like those of some seals found at Episcopi and Enkumi. Amongst the seal impressions of Ugarit are 2 of the so-called elaborate style from the house of the merchant Rashab Abu, who was a harbor master during the 13th century BC. The ownership and design of seals embedded long biographies that give us some indication of the meaning of Cypriot seals found overseas. Although these seals and sealings cannot be linked to specific people or traders from Cyprus, there are obvious associations between their context and some Ugaritic merchants who are intimately involved in what Joanna Smith sees as a unique integral relationship with Cypriots. And I now have to add and report here that based on finds from Pilar Kokinokramos, in the most recent issue of Akataka 145, which just appeared this week, the authors have discussed linear style seals, elite networks, and cultural connections in the late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. So this is going to add even further input to what has been written about seals and, at Ugarit and on Cyprus. Now, some of the most relevant documentary evidence that treats relations between these two polities comes from the houses of merchants, such as Rashap Abu, Yabninu, Urtenu, and Rapanu. These men played multiple roles within the polity at Ugarit and operated both under palatial contract as well as on a private basis. Along with their families, they were involved in multiple aspects of trade and were fully engaged in Cypro-Ugaritic relations. The House of Urtenu is especially interesting, as it contained the most recently excavated major archive from Ugarit, with nearly 550 tablets treating international royal correspondence, as well as administrative and commercial matters. Urtenu's house also contained 2 Cypriotic labels, as well as a range of Cypriot pottery. Along with Yabninu, Urtenu took part in many and diverse private exchange activities involving the import or exports of goods from or into Cyprus, the Aegean, Anatolia, Egypt, and northern Mesopotamia. Although merchants like Urtenu likely maintain most of the ships involved in maritime expeditions, the crown at Ugarit also invested in commerce and occasionally taxed merchants. In one case, a Cypriot trader sought to purchase ships offered for sale by one of his Ugaritic counterparts, but the king of Ugarit had to sign off on it. This was the subject of that 1983 paper in Tel Aviv that I mentioned earlier. Overall, then, by the end of the Middle Cypriot period, about 1650 BC, some people from Cyprus began to enjoy closer contacts with merchants and elites in Levantine coastal polities, notably with those from Ugarit and its ports. Cypriots thus acquired new, not only knowledge of distance and mercantile practices, but also new types of material goods, not least tin, which along with copper were the primary ingredients for producing bronze. Owing at least in part to their geographic position, some Cypriot coastal towns and Levantine port towns, like those at Ugarit, hosted commercial sailing vessels that were instrumental in the exchange networks that underpinned maritime trade in the late Bronze Eastern Mediterranean. Merchants, mariners, and emissaries in all the polities involved would have been familiar with their foreign counterparts, and some certainly traveled to overseas destinations. Coastal ports on both Cyprus and in the Levant were oriented toward the connecting sea. Those on Cyprus were geared to answer foreign demand for copper and other manufactured goods, while those in the Levant, and in particular at Ugarit, served as trading hubs on a much broader scale with a deeper time depth, and arguably with a more culturally embedded form of mercantile behavior. The volume Cyprus and Ugarit tallied 670 Cypriot pottery vessels from various deposits at Rosh Shamra, Minet El Beda, and Ras Ibn Hani. If you ask my opinion, this is probably about 1/3 of what actually traveled between the two polities. But this is what the current publication record allows me to discuss. This volume also estimated, as I say, 352 Canaanite jars from 22 different Middle and Late Bronze Age sites on Cyprus. The significance of these and all the other objects traded between Ugarit and Cyprus derives from the events and travels to which they were linked throughout their life histories and amongst the people who displayed or exchanged them. Key social objects, they were imbued with a past that linked their new owners to other elites in the Eastern Mediterranean interaction sphere. The biographic aura embedded in such luxury goods offered Cypriot as well as Ugaritic elites a blueprint for power and authority. As Nathan Meyer suggested to me, we might envision all such elite objects and the social practices they facilitated as calling cards from one wealthy mercantile family to another, a type of social lubrication that enabled further self-enrichment and politico-economic power. The objects and ideologies of connectivity that characterized these exchanges formed an integral part of the cosmopolitan late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean. The impression one gains is that of two very different societies, which shared a vital commercial link, if not an actual familial relationship. Ugaritic merchants operated out of a long-established trading emporium, whereas their Cypriot counterparts were evolving within a productive island-based economy. Raw materials first, finished goods later. In other words, for the more loosely formed society on Cyprus, one that was rapidly innovating in commercial enterprises, something new and distinct emerged. Although Cyprus and Ugarit were two very different kinds of society, they shared a vital maritime and mercantile link, one that, over time, had a transformative impact on Cyprus. Thank you very much. The thing that I haven't changed is my view.